Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2021. And that brings us to that release of a title which in fact already exists in the Criterion Collection at spine number 44. It exists as a Blu-ray release. However, this year, the Criterion Collection has released or re-released this title, and so it reemerges in the collection at said spine number, except we have the format being the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo release during this year of 2021. And I'm speaking about that film, which is from 1948, and the filmmakers are Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger. And the name of the work is The Red Shoes. This is the work from 1948, and it is from Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger. And its cast includes, among its brilliant members, people like Anton Walbrook and Maris Goring and Moira Shearer, and they each play the characters of Boris Lermontov and Julian Craster and Victoria Page, respectively, which forms this type of, one might call, a love triangle or a triangle of artistic and emotional temperaments that reaches a type of fever pitch as the film progresses. And what film are we speaking of? We are talking, of course, about this supreme work, this masterpiece of many levels, that work being The Red Shoes. The story or plot of The Red Shoes, I think, is a fascinating one, and it's one that focuses in on this particular ballet company whose company leader or impresario is this towering figure within the company and within the world of ballet and the theatrical arts in general. This is Boris Lermontov, the Anton Walbrook character. And we also see, through a certain set of circumstances that we are introduced to almost immediately, we also see the young, emerging artistic talents from the musical composition side of things. This is the Julian Craster character, the Maris Goring character. And we see, through a certain set of circumstances, already implied or built in to the proceedings, the notions of, say, the importance of the maintenance of creative, the creative impulse, and also, even despite one's attempts at honoring one's creative impulses, how the world of the arts, even from an academic viewpoint or a professional viewpoint, could still have within it a certain degree of betrayal and also competitiveness. And we see that early on in terms of the possibility of some of Julian's compositions being lifted or stolen or plagiarized before his very eyes, which leads to some further, say, emotional developments that ultimately brings him to the very ballet company that becomes the focus of this particular story, The Red Shoes. So that's one aspect of the plot or proceedings. And yet another aspect from, say, a different perspective, but one that leads to a type of intersection or a collision course, if you will, to create this triumvirate of artistic temperament, is that of the story of Victoria Page. This is the Moira Shearer character, and she is approaching it from the viewpoint of dance and the ballet. She is very eager, she's very willing, and she is very ambitious. And she is so ambitious that she really wants to make an impression upon this very famous impresario, Lermontov, to the point where she, through, again, her own set of circumstances, is able to land a position within this very prestigious company. But even in that particular process, or in that particular situation, she finds that it's often very difficult to get the attention from the various higher-ups in the creative forces departments. And this is because it is a very competitive world. It is a world of the highest of artistic and professional standards, and is one that is very unforgiving, and is one that is very pressed for time, so much so that it's also a world where we understand luck plays a very big part of the game. But even in terms of luck, in terms of talent, in terms of hard work, still things might not always go one's way, and one's dreams might become shattered in an instant. But despite those risks, and despite those potential emotional perils and pitfalls, we see the drive of young Vicky in the face of a lot of adversity, and maybe a lot of doubt from others, and she still is able, through a set of circumstances, slowly but surely, she's able to make her way to the center of the entire company, to the point where she becomes the star, or the rising star, in the eyes of the company, in the eyes of Lermontov. And her performance in the titular play, or the ballet, which is The Red Shoes in question, becomes a central focal point of the drama and the film, and also the sense of the expression of the arts, and the expression of the creative forces of the human condition. And through that embedding within the cinematic world of The Red Shoes itself, we see a whole lot of many different, say, forces that are working with each other or counteracting against each other. And perhaps, yes, the very struggle for the soul of Victoria Page is one of the key and one of the significant aspects of the plot and story, and character and thematic drive, again, with the emphasis or the attention placed on the character arc of Victoria Page, the Maura Shearer character, in terms of her ballet and performance, and her emotional state, and her relationships. I mentioned the character of Julian, because now we have a key relationship that is forged between these two young emerging artists within the same space of the same company. Not only are they collaborating on a professional level in terms of The Red Shoes and other works, they are also finding an emotional bond, a connection, a romantic interest, a mutual love and attraction as well. And that brings us to yet another aspect or facet of this triumvirate of artistic temperament and emotional temperament, and that being of the character of Boris Lermontov, the Anton Walberg character, who is the leader, or the impresario, of this ballet company, this troupe. And it is a collection and gathering of a really wonderful and eclectic and charming group of creative artists with their own sets of idiosyncratic temperaments that also lead to a number of clashes on stage during rehearsal, but that are also ultimately coming from a place of affection and mutual respect for, in the context of this particular art form. And also there is a sense of the humor and comic and human warmth at play, but also with the emergence, or the centralized positioning of the figure of Lermontov. We understand too that this is a high stakes situation. These circumstances bring with it a number of significant, and indeed even very dire, potentially dire consequences with them. And this is because so much emphasis and so much importance is placed on the beauty and structure and the whole dynamic of this art form. For these people, for people like Lermontov, this art, this ballet, is a religion. This is something that they really, truly believe in, to the point of perhaps it is given so much emphasis, maybe above all else and all other things, and even over certain intimacies of human interaction and emotional engagement with others. That is perhaps secondary to the primary importance of the supreme beauty of the art in question, namely the ballet. And so this becomes another central focus or focal point of the Lermontov character, and the way that it drives the various stories forward as far as the emerging talents and the newfound success, and the way in which he, as the impresario and also as the towering figure in the lives, in particular in the lives of Victoria Page and Julian Craster, we realize that his influence becomes one of the most critical aspects of the underlying tension that exists between and among this trio of characters, Julian, Vicky, and Boris. That being the struggle and the very fight and confrontation over this type of philosophy, namely a philosophy concerning the nature or the role of emotional satisfaction and emotional development and intimacy, and the type of the lives of one's own maybe private life, as it were, settling down, finding satisfaction in human relationships on the one hand, and on the other hand, devoting oneself entirely, or perhaps exclusively or practically exclusively, to the philosophy and notion of the art and the art form, and that is ballet. So oftentimes the phrase that's being used is sort of the struggle between art versus life. I think that could be expressed in a number of different facets, especially in the context of the Red Shoes and this triumvirate, or this trio, especially over the struggle and the battle over the soul of Victoria Page, in a manner of speaking. And so we can see, for instance, the push and pull, the ebb and flow between trying to find satisfaction in, say, a romantic relationship on the one hand, but how that might lead possibly to the erosion of one's artistic skills and one's talents, due to the fact not just because one's attention is devoted elsewhere, but also because one's time is also being given to something other than the further training or the further practicing or the further development of one's artistic skill. Now, one might get a sense that this is a very dramatic form of this type of discussion. After all, there are many instances, maybe in real life, where indeed this type of balance between one's professional life and one's personal life can indeed be struck. And we see perhaps a number of instances in real life and professional arts and the like, where it seems like such type of balance seems to be struck with a great deal of success. Nevertheless, I think the dramatic landscape or tapestry that is at work here, I think, really adds a sense of potency to the kind of pull of the hypnotic pull of the film, because these pulls, I think, are also at the same time things that aren't necessarily beyond sort of a general comprehension. Another way to say that is, I'm not an artist, and I'm not a dancer. I'm not a professional dancer or performer by any means. At the same time, I can relate and I can understand and sympathize with this dramatic tension that's established, namely this idea of devotion and having to make a choice between one thing and the other thing. And you can only choose one thing. You love both things perhaps equally, and you find a certain satisfaction in either of the choices, and yet for whatever reason you have to choose one over the other. So which is that to be? What choice will you make? Now that's something I think can be understood by a lot of people. And I can say that that's probably one way to describe the struggle and the choice that is on display for the characters in question, in particular the character of Vicky, the Maura Shearer character, and what it is she goes through, and what it is she is determined to do, and what it is she is devoted to, and how far she is willing to go, or not willing to go in order to achieve the ends or those things that she really wants to achieve. And one of the questions too for the characters, in particular Victoria, is what is it that she wants? What is it that will hopefully bring her a sense of satisfaction? Maybe she herself doesn't know. Maybe there are certain senses of temptation or certain things that remind her of the various aspects of her life that she's interested in. After all, she, like many of the other characters in the film, is a very complex a human being. And I think that is, she is not a two-dimensional figure. She is a multi-dimensional figure. And as a result of such multi-dimension, she has interests that are in many different fields. And sometimes those are contrary to each other. And we find at the center of this film, The Red Shoes, the struggles that we see focusing in on the Red Shoes, one of those very contrary aspects to that multi-dimension, namely the choice that she and others indeed must make in the context of the Red Shoes, in the context of the ballet company, in the context of art, in the context of life, and specifically in the story itself, focusing in on this triumvirate, this trio of, as I say, emotional and artistic temperaments. It's a fascinating glimpse into this type of emotional human struggle. And I should say, too, that it is presented in these many different, almost hall of mirrors type of way when we're watching The Red Shoes. And what I mean by this is we are presented as viewers, I think, with this, I think, core of a human story that has an emotional truth or a sense of truth about it, because the drama is something that I think is very relatable and very understandable. This type of human drama is presented in many different ways, in many different facets within the construct of this film, a brilliant construct, I might add. For example, we see it through the prism of the dance company or the ballet company, and we see, as I say, in that presentation, all the facets of the ballet company, all the different personalities that are existent there. Sometimes they're friendly, sometimes they're antagonistic, and there's a rivalry there, but that's part of the charm, that's part of the warmth, that's part of the allure of this particular ballet company, and that adds a certain sense of warmth to the cinematic expression. Added on to that, the use of the technology, the use of the color. This is a Technicolor process in terms of its cinematic presentation. And so this also leads to the application of the real and the unreal, a sense of the maybe the heightened reality that is injected into various situations. Again, the drama is something that on the one hand is very relatable, but at the same time it is taken to a real heightened and almost extreme dramatic dramatic conclusions or dramatic resolutions. And so that sense of taking something and stretching it in this context of turning it into a heightened and almost almost absurd sense of intensely realized drama. And that's one of the real alluring and exciting aspects of The Red Shoes. This is, I think, applied very well in the way that the colors are used. There's a real sense of things being maybe muted and nuanced and calm on the one hand, but then they give way to a sense of the saturated and the extreme in a very skillful and purposely applied way. Thus, again, suggesting this idea of things and ideas and experiences that can be said to have its roots in a very relatable sense of drama, but then once those roots or once those moments of drama hook you, then they take you into these elongated and stretched out, intensified moments of drama that lead to these highly intensified, almost wonderfully exaggerated and beautifully realized senses of supremely heightened drama and tension. And so I love that way of the film taking you and bringing you in through the appearance and color, and then absorbing you and then taking you along as it stretches its way to its sort of inexorable conclusion. It's a real sort of technique that is a genius in terms of the application of the allure of the image, and that's definitely achieved through the application of the color and the photography, Jack Cardiff, etc., and also the set design as well. And that leads also to the way that dance and performance is also presented here. There is a way too where this is also a very multi-dimensionally presented aspect of the film. On the one hand, we do have the sense of the quote-unquote real in the way in which the ballet troupe, the background, the backstage rehearsal process is depicted in certain aspects, things seen from the backstage drama, and also things seen from the audience spectator seats, etc. So that has a sense of the establishment of something that is palpable and real from the viewpoint of us, the spectators, the viewers, namely things that remind us of the reality of the situation on the one hand, and that's the depiction of the dance in the theater. But, for instance, in the centerpiece of the film, the Red Shoes performance, we see how the film turns this performance or palpable performance aspect into something that is almost a three-dimensional type of a magical space that transcends the reality of the situation, that transcends the physics of what we have come to understand up to a certain point. And the physics are destroyed in a beautifully poetic way when we are taken into the actual ballet itself. And the cinema of the archers here, Powell and Pressburger, in applying various techniques of, say, silent cinema or techniques of effects in camera, speeding up certain things, turning colors and editing into a way that makes something that is real almost ephemeral and magical at the same time, and mysterious and haunting. And it all happens before our very eyes in an instant, in a flash. And that type of, as I say, expression is another way in which this film brings us in with palpable things that feel in a certain sense, quote unquote, real. But then when we are brought in, we are swept up by the magic and the haunting nature of how the film takes us. And this is certainly true when we, as viewers, are absorbed in the the Red Shoes ballet sequence. It is a tour de force, a true tour de force of cinematic expression, the way that art itself is expressed, the way that the dance movements are centralized and focused upon. We should mention, of course, the wonderful performances by the actors concerned. Moira Shearer, for example, as in terms of her performance as a dancer as well as an actor, and having a lot of emotional scenes as well, where she has to have this real sustained, heightened sense of emotional strain to her particular situation, Vicky's situation, when she, as I say, is really struggling to make a choice over who will she choose, essentially. Will it be Lermontov or will it be Julian Craster? It's the ultimate love triangle, if ever there was one. So, and so that type of performance is absolutely magnificent. And the same is true for Anton Walberg's performance and Maris Goring's performance. They bring a sense of intensity and earnestness and a directness to what it is they are. And sometimes their sense of passion can become so ferocious in their own ways to be almost frightening, to be almost overwhelming in their own ways. And so this is leading to the ultimate clashes of various character arcs and development. So this is, again, another source of the greatness of this film, and it's due in large part to the way in which the performances are handled and balanced and brought to fruition. So again, we have various different prisms, different ways in which we can look at this film, all of which acting together in the single unified form that is the film The Red Shoes. I should mention too Hein Heckroth's design. There's a painterly aspect to the proceedings and the backgrounds, especially when you get to the ballet sequences. There is this lovely, almost hand-painted or handcrafted way that things are brought together. So this is, again, showing us in an interesting way that same sense of reminding us of the palpably real on the one hand, but then when we see these elements brought together in this magical way, they almost transport us into a different place in time, a different realm. Again, the elongation of time and space to take something that is palpably real on the one hand and then turn it into something that is truly heightened and exaggerated and therefore poetic and beautiful on the other hand. We see it in the drama, we see it in the character arcs, and yes, we see it in the various forms of the visual presentation, the use of color, the use of images, the use of the decor and setting and production design. So Hein Heckroth's contributions are truly outstanding indeed, as well as the photography, Jack Cardiff's extraordinary work here in terms of the director of photography, the photographic elements. And of course, we have to mention, I mentioned the dance aspects to some degree, and also there is the music aspect here, how music itself becomes its own character, and how the music really drives many aspects, not least of which, of course, the central performance of the Red Shoes. That is one of the great hallmarks of British cinema, or 20th century cinema, or the cinema of the Archers. And this is also due in large part to the contribution of Brian Easdale. And so these elements are brought together again under the control of the Archers, Powell and Pressburger, to this genius level. And then, of course, the performances as well, which I mentioned earlier. And I should say, too, that this type of injection of the use of, say, or the reliance on a type of accessible aspects of human drama, things or situations that we can relate to and we can understand to a certain degree on the one hand, but then that are taken within the construct of the Red Shoes, the story and the film, to various, say, poetic and almost operatic heights of heightened realism, beyond the sense of the real, into the surreal, or into the supremely and intensified dramatic sense. This also can be a type of reflection, as Ian Christie mentions. It could be a reflection of a type of movement of British Romanticism that we saw, or that we have seen in various forms of British literature, and also 20th century British cinema. And here we have, in the context of a type of romantic movement in storytelling and in drama and British drama, the idea of myth and legend and folklore, and the creation of stories and the creations of myth and tales, and the telling of tales. The story of the Red Shoes, the Hans Christian Andersen story, is the basis for what becomes the ballet of the Red Shoes that we see presented here in the film. But we also understand that within the film itself, this type of story within a story, we are also witness to this idea of the film in the hands of the Archers being perhaps a type of comment, or maybe an example of, in the best sense of the tradition of British Romanticism, this example of the creation of myth, the creation of stories, or the creation of a type of legend. And indeed, if that's the case, we are witnessing a type of, say, archetypical drama. And I think that sense of the archetypical makes even further, I think, maybe sense when one realizes again just how primal, or just how fundamental these particular emotional points of these characters, in particular the trio of the main characters, how fundamental their feelings and their motivations are. And when those fundamental feelings and motivations clash, my goodness, do they clash? They clash in the most glorious and frightening and also quite intense way. That is part of the magic, that is part of the charm, and that is indeed part of the appeal and the pull that leads to a type of sense of the magical and the haunting, and yes, indeed, the tragic. It is all here wrapped up in this wonderful, almost confection, technicolor delight, extravaganza that is also a treat for the eyes and the ears and indeed all the senses when one is watching this and being absorbed by this and being totally enwrapped in the magic and mystery and the beauty and appeal of this work from 1948. This is from Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger. This is the masterpiece, The Red Shoes. The Criterion Collection has released this film, The Red Shoes, in this year 2021 on this new release, taking advantage of the format of 4K UHD. Thus, we get this 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition that is again being released during this year of 2021. It reminds us, or it brings to our attention, of course, that we already have in the collection, again at same spine number 44, the Blu-ray edition, which is from 2010, and at the time it was described as the new high-definition master from the award-winning 2009 digital restoration with uncompressed monaural soundtrack. So this was what we have in terms of the Blu-ray option from several years ago. And now we have this new release, which is described as being also based on said 2009 restoration. And so we are getting, therefore, the Blu-ray version of this, which I understand is based on the same 2009 restoration. And we also get the 4K UHD, which I also understand, based on materials, is also based on the 2009 restoration. And indeed, if we look at the notes that are included in the booklet for this new release, it says, among other things, this 4K digital master was created in Dolby Vision HDR from the 2009 4K digital restoration, which was made from the Technicolor 35mm original camera negatives and optical tracks. On the 4K UHD disc, the feature is presented in Dolby Vision HDR. On the Blu-ray, it is presented in high definition SDR. And so it is my understanding, therefore, that the Blu-ray presentation is that which we saw in the previous release, which is also thus based on the 2009 restoration. And now, too, with the 4K UHD option in this new release, we are also seeing a presentation also relying on the 2009 restoration. So that's my understanding of the particular situation of this new release. Now, with that being said, I should say that the Blu-ray that was released several years back, and also the Blu-ray here that is one of the two discs here, I think is absolutely splendid. It always was splendid, and it always shall be a splendid and beautiful and magnificent presentation. And it looks marvelous indeed. I should say with that, however, that the 4K UHD presentation of this and the look and the sound of it is also glorious, beautiful, pristine. There is a type of sharpness of lines that I had never noticed before, and it really came to my attention when I was watching this 4K UHD presentation on the 4K screen. And it really was very pronounced because in previous versions that I knew of this, the pronouncements were very wonderful and fresh indeed, but I think there was something in particular about the 4K UHD presentation this time around where I really saw the definition of, say, lines, of separations between, say, certain colors. That was incredibly effective, and so I was very taken by the 4K UHD presentation that was included here. Now, that's not to say that I think the Blu-ray presentation is subpar. I think the Blu-ray presentation was and is excellent. So if you have the Blu-ray presentation, I think you are in good hands with that, and that's not an issue at all. But if you are looking for the 4K UHD alternative, I think you will also find yourself in excellent hands if you choose to get this particular option. As I say, it looks and sounds really great. So I'm very impressed with how Criterion has handled this 4K UHD format. As I've mentioned elsewhere, I must say that maybe going into this, I wasn't necessarily, say, convinced that 4K UHD was something that would be for me for all things and all releases. And maybe deep down within my own, say, perspective, my subjective viewpoint, maybe I still feel that way. However, I think a release like The Red Shoes from Criterion this year has really shown me how effective this 4K UHD format can be in the hands of Criterion. This is a stellar release, so I'm very, very impressed with this. And we should also talk about the supplements that are also found on this particular release. I should point out, too, that we have the 4K UHD disc and we have the Blu-ray option. And so on the 4K UHD disc, we don't have the supplements, the video-based supplements on such 4K disc. Those will be found on the Blu-ray disc. But what we will find on the 4K disc and also on the Blu-ray disc, we will find the audio options there. And among those audio options are the commentary track from 1994, described from 1994, and this is sort of with Ian Christie. He leads the commentary track, where he also serves as a type of moderator of the commentary track. And also there are edited into the commentary track comments from people like Martin Scorsese and Marius Goring and Maurice Shearer and Jack Cardiff, etc. And so it's an ensemble of various sources of comments from different players and different performers and different participants in the film, and also admirers and experts in the film. And also they are edited together to form this one long continuous feature-length commentary track. It is a 94 commentary track, and indeed we have seen or we've heard this commentary track in past releases. It is, of course, found on the earlier current Blu-ray release from several years back. You can also actually find it on yet an earlier release of this in the Criterion Collection. This happens to be the DVD release from back in the day. And so you can also find the commentary track option here. It's a great commentary track. And also I should point out that, just to take a step further back in time, we also had the film The Red Shoes released by Criterion on this wonderful, one of the best in the Laserdisc catalog, I should say, this wonderful Laserdisc release, with this trifold presentation here. And part of the options was that commentary track. So it's really, really great stuff. Also Jack Cardiff and Brian Easdale, etc. Great. So we have this continuity from the Laserdisc era of Criterion, and it's a wonderful, comprehensive commentary track filled with so much information, so many details about the aspects of the drama, the backstage aspects, the lead up to the various casting, and the approach to opera to the arts and to ballet, although it has an operatic aspect to it in terms of the presentation of the drama. But also the focus in on the ballet, of course. Jack Cardiff makes some very interesting comments about how he felt about ballet before he started work on The Red Shoes, and then how he feels about ballet afterwards. And Maurice Shearer mentions how she ended up being cast in the role. There was a certain maybe doubt from her whether she would indeed accept the role or not. She was a professional dancer, and she also had also gifts and talents in many areas, not just her dance, but also in her ability as an actor. And my goodness, her performance is one of the one of the great aspects of this great film. So it is a powerhouse of a performance from Moira Shearer. So we get some details about that. We also get some details about the working relationship between Powell and Pressburger. We get some details about some of the performers in the dance troupe, or with the main performances of Emeric Goring or Anton Walbrook as an example, and the like. And we get some details too that don't emerge elsewhere. Maybe there is some tension between certain performers or certain members of the crew, etc. So this is also mentioned. There's also this idea of the dance, the talents that were also involved, Leonid Massine or Robert Helpman, or and other performers as well that bring a sense of life and a sense of humanity to the various scenes here, but also bring with them the wonderful level of expertise and also the knowledge and experience of dance and the dance world and the ethic and the mindset that is needed. So Ludmila Cherina is also mentioned here. And also there are some wonderful reference points to the source materials or the various inspirations for this particular work. Hans Christian Andersen is also, of course, referenced, but also there is the idea of dance and the idea of the world of dance. Nijinsky and Diaghilev are mentioned as well. So there are these say maybe antecedent or these maybe points of historical or the art reference points from the art world that may or may not be say the inspirations for characters like Lermontov, but also there's maybe some parallels that are made with Korda, or there are some parallels that are made with Powell and Pressburger themselves. And so for these and other reasons, I think we're getting a full, robust, comprehensive commentary track. It was a brilliant commentary track when it was first released back in the early 1990s, 94, and it still remains one of the best commentary tracks of any Criterion release. It is one of the best, and so I'm so glad it still maintains a place within the Criterion canon, including this recent 2021 release. So if you haven't checked out the film with this classic commentary track, please, I hope you have the opportunity to do so, because it is really brilliant. So please check it out if you can. And then also another audio option that you can find in addition to the optional commentary track is you can set the audio option to what is the audio recording of Jeremy Irons reading excerpts from the novelization of The Red Shoes. Now, this is the novelization that is described as being from 1978 from Powell and Pressburger themselves. And so what we have is you can select it, and it's essentially feature length. And so you hear Jeremy Irons' voice. He introduces himself in that wonderful tone of voice that he has. And he is reading, as I say, excerpts from the novelization. And this was written by Powell and Pressburger, again, many years after the release of the film in 48. But it is, we also understand, very closely, it is a very close a telling of the story that we saw in the film, with a number of, say, expansions or exceptions, in particular the way in which the novelization is able to go into the inner thoughts or the inner, say, commentaries of the various characters, again, through a type of omniscient narrator focus that the novelization seems to have. And this is very evident in a lot of the passages that Jeremy Irons is reading. For instance, we are watching the film, and the reading or the excerpt passages read by Jeremy Irons coincides with the scenes that we are more or less watching on screen. So we get to hear the same types of, say, dialogue that is also part of the novelization itself. But in between those lines of dialogue that we hear being read by Irons in the novelization excerpts, we also get these wonderful passages of the sort of inner monologue workings of the various characters, what it is they're thinking. There's a particular moment, or maybe there's a letter that Julian sent to Lermontov earlier on in the film that he doesn't want him to read because he realizes that it maybe goes a bit too far. But we actually hear certain excerpts or certain words of what that letter might have said. as an example. Or we might hear the inner workings of Vicky and what it is she's really feeling when she has to make certain choices, when she maybe coincidentally meets Lermontov in a train carriage at a certain key moment of the film. And she has to make a decision as to whether she will maintain her life in a type of tranquil domesticity, or will she make the plunge back into the world of the arts and the ballet and performance? And so on screen, we get a sense of that type of tension that she must be feeling internally. But the novelization excerpts that are read out by Jeremy Irons really give actual words and voice to these particular moments. And so these are examples of where the novelization is really it's so insightful, and it goes into these various, say, interior monologues that really present other facets of the psychologies of the characters, Lermontov, Vicky, and Julian, as being the prime examples, because they are the main players of the proceedings, of course. So to have this option is really fascinating, and Jeremy Irons, his voice as he's reading it, it's just so so alluring and so hypnotic, and it's great. I think this is in the in any event, he was and still is an actor who's made many appearances, and so you can just hear that true range in his voice when he's reading these excerpts. So that's another option. I should say too that this was an option that always was available in past releases. I draw your attention once again to the earlier DVD release, and also to the earlier Laserdisc release as well. So we had that as an option, but here we have it again. And I should say too that having this option to the Red Shoes novelization is very important. Also, too, it's brought up here and elsewhere, but this is also an example, of one of the last times, perhaps, that Powell and Pressburger actually worked together, collaborated. This time on the novelization as well, again in the late 70s. So that is another interesting aspect of the Powell-Pressburger relationship, the Archers' relationship, and it's also linked to one of their great triumphs from the 1940s, that being the Red Shoes. So I think in that way, too, the inclusion of the novelization is very poignant, as well as being very insightful and very much a continuation of the storyline that we see played out so brilliantly in the cinematic form, which is the Red Shoes. So that's another audio option that's available. And so with that discussion of the audio options, the commentary track or the novelization option, now let us turn our attention to the supplements menu. Once again, we're going to have to go to the Blu-ray disc for these supplements. And so you can put in the Blu-ray disc and you can see what those supplements are. And those supplements are, first of all, we have a restoration demonstration. This is described as being from 2009. It's approximately 4 minutes, and this is with Martin Scorsese, who's speaking directly to us, and he's talking to us about the challenges of the restoration process vis-a-vis the Red Shoes due to certain issues with regard to, say, what's known as the 3-strip Technicolor process. This is a film in glorious Technicolor, but due to that type of physical aspect of the film itself, that meant that there were certain areas in which the prints were damaged, and the timing of the deterioration was different depending on what color strip one was talking about. And so it becomes very technical, but the end result is that the restoration process thus becomes very complex indeed, and has to be essentially my understanding is it had to be timed to perfection in order to not create any sense of blurring or a distortion of the image in the restoration process. So this is one of the challenges that he refers to, and also the idea of mold damage and color correction, etc., damage to the film emulsion, etc. So these and other details are aspects that Martin Scorsese refers to when he's giving his demonstration, say, summary of the particular process. It is a very, again, I'm not at all proficient when it comes to the technical aspects of cinema and photography, but with that in mind, I found his talk to be very, I think, easy to follow, and it was presented very well, and it had certain visual cues and also aids that also helped me to better understand what the general process was and what the issues were. So this is a really wonderful thing. Once again, this is in reference to the recent 2009 restoration process, so we're not going to get it in any of the older releases, but we did see it, for instance, in the 2009 or 2010 Criterion Blu-ray release. So this is something that it's again a continuing, or it's a carryover from what we saw in the previous most recent Blu-ray release. So that is the Martin Scorsese introduction of the restoration demonstration. Also, what we saw in the earlier Blu-ray release is Profile of the Red Shoes, and this is described as being from 2000, the year 2000, a documentary approximately 25 minutes, described as being made for Carlton TV. And here we have, again, more participants and more experts in the film The Red Shoes, and the Powell and Pressburger works, the Archers specifically. Ian Christie is mentioned, Jack Cardiff, also Chris Chalice, and also other members, other people who are closely associated with some of the key voices, the key persons in the film. And so this brings a lot of detail about the various participants and what it is that they wanted to contribute. There's a discussion of Hein Heckroth, for example, and his viewpoint and his philosophy in terms of his own works as a type of artist and painter, and how that might have made his work on the Red Shoes somewhat unique from his perspective. It was still undoubtedly a mind-blowing artistic triumph in terms of the visual dynamic that he was able to conjure up for purposes of creating the magic and spectacle of the tapestry of and the world of the Red Shoes. And also there are some wonderful aspects about the capturing of dance and the depiction of dance itself. One of the brilliant things that we see in the Red Shoes and Powell and Pressburger cinema overall is how they are so able to capture the concept of movement and the dynamic electricity of human movement. So, for instance, the turning of the head and the neck of Moira Shearer as she's dancing during one of those early performances of Victoria Page, the way that she is spinning and her head spins at the same time, and the quickness of that it seems simple on the one hand, but the more one sees it and the more one thinks about it, the more realize that this actually is a very complex thing, and the magic of the cinema and able to capture this is just so hypnotically beautiful. And another example is the way in which we see characters run down steps or run down stairs. Sometimes they're even circular stairs. There's a very famous sequence involving the showing of feet running down a circular staircase. And so this type of movement and kinetic energy in things that seem to be everyday movements, like the turning of one's head or walking down some steps. This is a fascinating aspect and example of how brilliant the Powell and Pressburger team and crew were able to capture human movement in a way that is, again, heightened reality, and it really adds to the extreme beauty and poetic charm of what it is we are watching. And it's, again, finding its voice and place in the context of dance and the dance sequences, and also the struggles of the human stories. And so just great examples here that are brought up. And also Hans Christian Andersen is referenced. I mentioned earlier Ian Christie's great comments about the creation of myths and legend, English mythology, linked to a type of romantic literature and cinematic movement, the idea of invention of new stories that have a mythic quality, and that's certainly the case for the ballet The Red Shoes, which has its basis in the Hans Christian Andersen tale which also is serving to create its own myth and legend in the context of the Powell Pressburger cinematic canon as well, and also in the canon of British cinema of the 20th century, and also 20th century cinema overall. So those levels, I think, are quite fascinating. So Ian Christie's comments here are very, very apropos indeed. And also the idea of the in-camera effects that were used, especially in the ballet sequence, silent cinema techniques that were also used, the way that the film depicts the ballet from the vantage point of the audience, but then suddenly immerses one into the world of the ballet itself, and it takes us all on this ride through the three-dimensional space, almost from the perspective of the dance, and we see the world kind of wrapping itself around us before our very eyes, and our senses are overwhelmed by this space that seems to be enveloping us as we are watching. It's one of the most magical sequences, and so this type of reference point and discussion point that's found in this great documentary is another reason why it's a valuable documentary indeed. So please check it out if you can. Once again, it's called Profile of the Red Shoes from 2000, the year 2000. It's something that we saw, once again, in the earlier, most recent Blu-ray release. And that's not all, because then we get a one-on-one discussion from Cannes in 2009. This is an interview with Thelma Schoonmaker Powell, approximately 14 minutes. And this is speaking, or Thelma Schoonmaker Powell is speaking from her experience as a filmmaker and as a cinematic technical expert, as well as her professional and personal associations with Michael Powell and with Martin Scorsese, etc., and her deep knowledge of the Archer's work, including The Red Shoes, including her participation in the 2009 restoration process. And so she is speaking from her experience in all of these areas in that wonderful way that she's able to describe certain issues, describe the importance of having the restoration at that particular point in time, 2009, how the elements were apparently very, very far gone at a certain stage, so it became almost necessary or vital or critical to make the restoration efforts at that particular time, and the type of things that she hoped that would be emphasized or re-emphasized or rediscovered upon the release of this restoration again in 2009. And also that leads her to, I think, some really wonderful and lovely comments, insightful comments about the Powell Pressburger working relationship and dynamic, the types of filmmakers that they were, and how that filmmaking approach really led them to create the masterpiece that is The Red Shoes, and some of the aspects of that working relationship vis-a-vis the film The Red Shoes itself. So this is a great interview to have, and it is something that we had seen from the earlier Blu-ray release. So it's a wonderful thing to have carried over. So please check it out if you can. And then we also have what's called the Stills Gallery, and this is, it's divided into certain subsections, which is cast and crew section, filming in London section, filming in Paris section, filming in Monte Carlo, and deleted scenes, and also production and costume designs. And so there's a total of approximately 134 stills. It's in this slideshow presentation, excuse me. So you press the forward button or the backwards button to take you forward or backwards, with some explanatory text along the way. So this is very, very brilliant indeed. We do get this supplement from the earlier Blu-ray release, and indeed, actually, we get it in more or less in the same or similar version, I should say, from earlier releases back in the DVD era, and also indeed in the Laserdisc era. So it's more or less the same. And although I would say that this new modernized version of this Stills Gallery, I would say I prefer the newer version of it, because it's easier to navigate. And there's a little bit of some more stuff that's involved here. So it's pretty much intact, but I think the presentation here is certainly worthwhile indeed. So I'm glad it's carried over for this new 2021 release. So please check out this section as well if you can. Also in the similar vein, we have another supplement, which is Martin Scorsese's memorabilia. And we have, again, another slideshow presentation aspect, which is also carried over from earlier releases, by the way. But then we also have the presentation that was in the most recent Blu-ray release, now also in the Blu-ray disc for the 2021 combo edition. And so we have images and pictures of things that we understand were from or that are in Martin Scorsese's own personal collection, such as copies of or pictures of certain props, or pictures of scripts, actual working scripts with actual signatures on them, and lobby cards and poster art, etc. So again, this is a fascinating example. It's in terms of what we can see themselves, and also we see the notes as well, some of the writings as well, and also we get a sense too of Martin Scorsese's love and admiration for the works of the archers Powell and Pressburger, and in particular the Red Shoes. If one knows and one has heard interviews from Martin Scorsese, including, say, the interview excerpts or the commentary excerpts that can be found in the commentary track from '94, that's also part of this package, one can get a sense almost immediately just how much he loves this film. He really loves this film. And so to have this extra supplement that, again, has been carried over from past releases but still is here intact, it's truly, truly, truly beautiful. So if you haven't checked this out, please check it out if you can. It is really worth it. And that's not all, because then the supplements continue with what's called the Red Shoes Sketches. And this is the sort of animated film that is based upon the painted or paintings or pictures of Hein Heckroth. And so it's described as, in terms of the ballet sequence, the Red Shoes ballet sequence. And it's described as being animated, but in fact, perhaps it might be better described as being, it's not necessarily animated in the sense as it's not animated, it's not an animation per se, but these are shots of painted pictures. And the painted pictures are various, say, vantage points or scenes of various aspects or certain aspects of the ballet itself, the Red Shoes ballet, again, the centerpiece of the film, set to the Easdale music. And so and it's edited in a certain way to be set to the music and timed perfectly, again using the paintings as the basis for the visual image. And so this is referred to as the Red Shoes Sketches. It's approximately 15 minutes. And so what we have here is we have a number of, say, it can also be described as being, say, storyboard paintings, maybe another way of using it, and seeing the visualization, maybe it's often referred to in today's industry parlance as pre-visualization or previs. I know it's not exactly quite like that, but the concept, I think, is basically the same. And so we have this, in essence, this painting storyboard short movie of the ballet sequence itself. And so this has been carried over from past releases, actually, all the way back to the Laserdisc era. And so it's a wonderful highlight into the making of perhaps one of, if not the key central sequence in the film. And also we see the care and design and the real intricacy in terms of the preparation for the actual sequence itself, and also the depths of the imaginative process, the scope of imagination of Hein Heckroth and others in trying to conceptualize this particular sequence. It's very complex indeed, and it comes through, and the way that it succeeds in the final product is truly, truly astounding. So this is, I think, a really incredible, helpful, and enlightening inclusion to have as part of the supplement. Now, it has its own sub-menu, so you can press the play button as part of that sub-menu, or you can press what's called the About area, and that'll lead you to some introductory text within the menu itself about what this particular Red Shoe Sketches is. And then you can go to another option, which is Play with Comparison. And this is, you can have the option of playing it, and you can see how it compares with the actual ballet sequence itself. And so it's really interesting to see how the paintings coincide with the actual final images or the final sequence itself. So that comparison option is still made available. And yet another option is you can watch this particular Red Shoes sketches with the audio option of listening to the reading of the Hans Christian Andersen tale, The Red Shoes, again read by the one, the only Jeremy Irons. So you have all these options available. And I should say too that we again saw these options available in the past releases that I have in front of me. So it's nice to have that type of continuity from the back in the early Criterion Laserdisc days. And so we have that here as well. So if you are interested in a type of construction or deconstruction of one of, if not the key sequence in this film, and one of the most important sequences arguably in all of the filmography of Powell and Pressburger, this is a great place to go. So please check this out if you can. And then we have a theatrical trailer. It's a really excellent theatrical trailer. Again, we have seen it in past releases, so it's great to have this here as well. And so I should say that, therefore, we have, in essence, the same package or the same presentation and the same set of supplements, I understand it, that we saw in the most recent Blu-ray from Criterion back in 2010. So it's essentially the same. And with a few differences, we are getting, as I mentioned earlier, some carryover from even earlier releases, the DVD release, and then yet the earlier Criterion Laserdisc release as well. I should point out, however, just for the sake of completeness, that we did see in these earlier releases as well, we saw an option for a list of the filmography, the Powell and Pressburger filmography list. You can press that, you can get a really convenient list. That filmography, unfortunately, is not found in the more recent releases of the Red Shoes and Criterion. But again, this is a type of filmography thing that one can find, say, online or something like that. I think there are many sites online that have filmographies, of many artists, including those of Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger. So, but that's just something to keep in mind. And also, I should point out that, as I mentioned earlier, there are supplements in these newer releases that, say, weren't included in the older releases as well. So there is a give and take when it comes to things that are included and things that aren't included. So, in any event, we have this new 4K UHD Blu-ray combo, which seems to be paralleling that most recent Blu-ray release from Criterion that we have here. So just in case you're interested. I should point out too, before we get to the booklets, let me just point out too that this is the new Criterion release from 2021 on this side, and on this side here, what I'm holding is the earlier Blu-ray from 2010. Now you can tell that the cover arts is the same, except interestingly enough, maybe the tone, it seems a little bit lighter in the earlier Blu-ray release than it appears in this new combo, 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo, which is here on what I'm pointing to right now, which is an interesting change. I'm not sure exactly why this is the case, but you can actually tell too in terms of the booklets. So this is the, let's see, the booklet right here. Yes, this is the booklet that corresponds to the DVD, the 2010 Blu-ray release, and this is the booklet that corresponds to, yes, the new 4K UHD combo, Blu-ray combo here. So the newer Blu-ray release from 2021 and the older release from 2010. So you can tell too that there's the same difference in tone quality when it comes to the newer release versus the release from about 10 years ago. So it's an interesting change. I'm not sure exactly why that is, but in any event, for the most part, we're still getting similarity in terms of the actual Blu-ray packaging itself. And it's in these plastic cases, and I can tell for the most part, they appear to be almost similar, if not exactly similar, in terms of size and dimension. And again, here we have the 4K UHD release here on this side and the older Blu-ray release. So there seems to be the same continuity in terms of overall presentation and alignment of the text, etc., with a couple differences, of course, but I think these are very minute differences. And except for, say, the difference in the actual, say, tone of the actual pictures that are used themselves, it is more or less continuous. There's a sense of continuity. So in any event, that's what we are getting right here in terms of the packaging or presentation. It again is in this plastic casing, and so I should point out too that in the other 4K UHD combo releases from Criterion from 2021, I mentioned titles like, say, Citizen Kane or Menace to Society, or others, Uncut Gems, Mulholland Drive. We had the Digipack presentation or packaging for those titles. Here we have the use of the plastic casing. Now, I'm not sure if this is because of the particular copy that I happened to purchase when I made my purchase online, or maybe I'm not sure what the situation is, but in any event, the copy that I have here is the plastic case, which is something that we haven't seen yet, or this is the first time we are seeing Criterion releasing a 4K UHD title not using the Digipack packaging, but rather using the plastic casing. But I don't think it's of any major concern. On the contrary, I think it's perfectly fine. The plastic casing is very serviceable indeed. We have this stacked system of the casing, and it has, I have no issue with it at all. It doesn't look like they're touching or anything of that sort. So that's perfectly fine for me and from my own vantage point when it comes to the casing. And then finally, when it comes to the booklet, it is, as I mentioned earlier, more or less the same or almost the same. Practically speaking, the same booklet that we saw in the earlier Blu-ray release from 2010. Again, with certain, maybe minor differences perhaps, but overall it is the same, including the contents. When we talk about the contents of this, we have, for example, certain writings here. So first we have the David Ehrenstein essay, which is called Dancing for Your Life. So that's something that we saw in the earlier 2010 release. Also something that we saw in the earlier 2010 release was some notes from Robert Gitt, which is about the restoration. So these two writings are also included as part of this new release. So we're getting what we got earlier, but that's great because these writings are also great in their own way. So if you haven't checked these out, please do so. They are well worth it. I should just also point out, for the sake of completeness of conversation, I suppose, that in the earlier DVD release, and indeed in the Criterion Laserdisc, we actually had an essay, a write-up from Ian Christie. And so we don't have that same Ian Christie essay in any of the new Blu-ray, or we don't have that essay, the Ian Christie essay, in, say, the 2010 Blu-ray or the new 2021 4K UHD Blu-ray combo. So, well, which is a shame, because the Ian Christie essay I thought was really, really wonderful. But we do get Ian Christie comments in, say, the documentary, the 2000 documentary, which is also included, as well as parts of the commentary track, which is also included, the 94 commentary track. So no worries about that as far as comments from Ian Christie are concerned. So, but just in case you are interested, that's something to keep in mind with regard to the earlier DVD and the earlier Laserdisc. So I think that can bring us to a conclusion about this particular title, The Red Shoes, released by Criterion using this new format during this year of 2021. It is yet another reason to celebrate the legacy and beauty and charm and magnificence of this particular work from Powell and Pressburger. It is one of the great achievements of cinema, period. Oh, let me say that again. It is one of the great achievements of cinema, period. And the fact that we have this new release using the new format will maybe give people the opportunity to discover it or rediscover it, whatever the case may be. And I should say too that, again, depending on where you are, or, as a consumer, as a cinema viewer, as a fan of cinema, as an expert and enthusiast in cinema, the 4K UHD release is certainly not, you don't have to get it. If you have a release of The Red Shoes that you are relying upon and have have seen many times, say the earlier Blu-ray or other releases from elsewhere, and you want to rely on those, that is perfectly fine. Of course, those are your choices and those are your preferences from your and your needs as I say, someone on your own cinema journey. But with that in mind, I should say that for me, the 4K UHD release was and is spectacular. And so I look forward to my continuing cinema journey with this 4K presentation, as well as the Blu-ray presentation and other past presentations as well, if and when I return to this particular work. And I do intend to return to this work as much as possible throughout the course of my cinema journey going forward. And that cinema journey would be on this work, again from 1948, The Red Shoes. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. And I should say too, in fact, that The Red Shoes, before I go, let me say that The Red Shoes here, this release from Criterion, I understand is, according to the calendar, the last release of Criterion in the physical media catalog of 2021. And so thank you so much for joining me on this journey ever since the beginning of the year. We've been going through each of the titles, each of the films that have been in, say, a box set or in the individual releases, etc. We started in January, and now we end here in December 2021 with this title. And so I want to thank you so much. Thank you for joining me on this particular journey, this ride. I enjoyed myself immensely, and that is due in large part to your contribution and your guidance and your own perspectives and viewpoints and comments, which you were so gracious and generous enough to share with me and with the rest of us. And so I remain so eternally grateful to you, my dear friends, for that, for giving me the opportunity to learn more from you about these wonderful films. So thank you so much for that throughout this year. I really want to, again, extend to you my deepest appreciation for all that you do and all that you will continue to do in terms of your enthusiasm for cinema and the Criterion Collection. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in some future video discussions, and perhaps, yes, if it is okay with you, maybe we can continue this discussion and journey and series of discoveries and explorations into the year 2022. So if you are interested, perhaps maybe we can meet there and then. But in the meantime, my friends, once again, let me say, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. So until we meet again, thank you and cheers.